now you're looking at man sitting on a chair, or on the screen, the amplified version of the man sitting on the chair. And you might be aware of the totality of the room peripherally. You're aware of the totality of the room also. All this is part of your visual perception right now. And that's fine. So your attention, the focus of your attention is there. And now my suggestion is, as your attention is focused on your visual perception, at the same time, can you be aware of yourself? As I've said before on various occasions, this does not mean you fall below thought. You rise above thought. You fall below thought when you're halfway towards sleep. You're so tired that you can't think anymore. And to approach sleep feels quite nice. You can't remember your problems anymore and your history. And you're moving towards sleep. And it's delicious. Sleep beckons you. But you're falling below thinking. The same happens with many kinds of drugs that temporarily can free you from we could call it the self, the mind-made self. Certain drugs can temporarily free you, but you don't rise above thought. You usually fall below thought. There are certain other types of drugs that are used in a particular setting, in a sacred setting, that certain drugs that have been used for thousands of years in religious or spiritual ceremonies. That's a different matter. I cannot say much about it because I have never experienced that kind of thing. So I don't like to talk about something that I have no direct experience of. But so-called recreational drugs that are taken just to experience moments where the ego is absent or in the background, that for some people can be especially those people who are very much burdened by their mind, the continuous torture of their mind. When they take the drug, they can get a little space of freedom and can relax for a while without the torture of their minds. And so you have a little smoke. Life is good. It's so good. And you even start laughing, perhaps. It looks as you're looked at superficially, it looks as you had suddenly become enlightened, but you haven't. But it can give you a little glimpse of what is possible when you become free of thought. But dependency on these things usually means that you begin to move below thought more and more. And that is a totally different vibrational frequency, a state of diminished alertness rather than heightened alertness, whereas the state of presence is a heightened alertness, but also a relaxed alertness. There's no tension in presence. So here's a very simple little practice. I call it practice, but at some point it becomes second nature and then it's not a practice anymore. When you look at something, anything, all use other senses too, but let's for a moment talk about the visual sense. You look at something. For example, now you're looking at man sitting on a chair, or on the screen, the amplified version of the man sitting on the chair. And you might be aware of the totality of the room peripherally. You're aware of the totality of the room also. All this is part of your visual perception right now. And that's fine. So your attention, the focus of your attention is there. And now my suggestion is, as your attention is focused on your visual perception, at the same time, can you be aware of yourself? No. The question is, what self? I don't mean the historical self, the person, not that self, but a deeper self, the presence of you, the being of you. Can you be aware of that and at the same time still have enough awareness left to perceive everything? So then you're aware of two things. You're aware of the perception, and you're aware of yourself as the perceiving consciousness. You can sense that there is a presence, and the perception is happening in that presence. That is easier in certain situations, in some situations than in others. It's perhaps relatively easy here and now, but in your daily life, often many things are going on and they all desperately demand your attention. And then, of course, it's not easy to practice also being aware of yourself as a perceiving presence. The phone rings and then somebody comes in and says, "Have you done this?" "No, not yet." No. Everything demands your attention. Your devices, they make noises. Bing, bing, something's coming in. So you're completely losing yourself in the externals. Like it's continually being drained of energy, of losing it. There's a leakage. And then people then become totally uncentered. There's no point of rest in them at all. They're completely all over the place. And many people live like that every day. And unfortunately, even young people these days, children, because they interact so much with these devices, have very short attention spans. Reading book can become difficult because nothing is happening. You have to keep your attention on it. Oh, God, I can't do that. What's the next thing that I can lose myself into? A horrible thing, a huge danger for human consciousness that we are facing. It's been bad enough even without the devices that we have. But now we've invented these devices. They amplify many of the dysfunctions of the egoic self that were already there even before, but now they become amplified. Yes, the devices can also be used for more helpful purposes, for more consciousness. There's certain. You could listen to Eckhart Tolle on your device and become present, but then put it away so that you don't get dependent on it. And then you don't need anything or anybody But so this is a wonderful practice to be used in association with sense perception. So now I'm talking about the visual, because for most humans, the visual is a predominant sense perception, followed by auditory, followed by either taste or tactile sense perceptions. But you can practice with any sense perception. You can practice with taste, for example, anything that you perceive. Here's a glass of water, and as I taste the water, it tastes good. Can I be aware of myself as a perceiving consciousness, without which there would be no sense perception? There must be a consciousness that makes the sense perception possible. And so that consciousness incarnates into the sense perception, so to speak. The sense perception arises created by this consciousness. You wouldn't perceive anything without the consciousness behind the sense perception. So become aware of yourself as the awareness behind the sense perception that makes the sense perception possible. And so you practice that. Auditory also, this is when you listen to any kind of sound. Natural sounds are particularly helpful, bird song or hearing the wind in the trees, or the sea, the noise of water, any kind of water. And so you listen to the noise, give it attention, but not 100% of your attention. Some attention is kept back and remains on the attention itself. Attention becoming aware of itself as the attention. Because you don't need to totally be in that thing. So you practice with relatively simple things, natural things, perceived natural, so visually, tactile. There's also the sense of smell. There's a breeze. There may be a certain scent in the air of nature, whatever it may be, and then you also perceive that. You might even be able to perceive a moment with all senses engaged. It's very rare, but it's possible that you can taste, smell, touch, auditory, visual. So you're totally, all the senses are alert, but behind it is a perceiving consciousness. And that is a point of rest, a point of stillness. You're centered within yourself. You're rooted in being. Rooted in being. Whatever happens is happening in your life, in your relationships, in your work situation, in your finances, in your living situation. That's your life situation, and that is what occupies almost everybody's mind continuously. Me and my life. Now, there is another dimension in you that wants to emerge that is far deeper than me and my life. Your mind has come with you here. You couldn't leave it behind. And if your mind has certain patterns, then those habitual patterns will sooner or later also surface here. And that's okay, as long as you know that this is most likely to happen. It's only your mind. There's nothing out here. It's the mind. So a great opportunity here is to be aware of your thought processes as you interact with other people, as you sit here, as you are in the dining hall, as you go for a walk in nature. And use all these situations to bring in awareness. I'll look at this in more detail now. First of all, you have nature here, magnificent nature. So you will be walking, you will be looking, you will be breathing and smelling, and you will be listening to the sounds, perhaps even touching the sand. There's plenty of it. A tree. So you use your senses, all your senses are there, and as you go about in between sessions, you interact with nature, and that's a great opportunity for allowing nature to help you to become still and present, rather than giving in to the hypnotism of the mind, with every thought wanting to draw your attention to it and saying, this is so important, I must think about this. And then you've disappeared. There's all that nature around you, but you are no longer there. The sacredness of nature suddenly is no longer there for you. So because your consciousness has been absorbed again by the mind stream. Very easy to happen, and most likely will happen many times in the next few days here, until the moment comes when you say, oops, this is what's going on. And then you have a choice of bringing your attention back to sense perceptions. Alertness returns. And you can, when you become familiar with the falling back into identification with the mind, and you might find that it says something it's not happy with something. Or something isn't quite enough. Or there's something missing. I have that feeling, there's something. And then very quickly the mind interprets that feeling as, yes, that's what's wrong here. Now I know. If you are familiar with the human mind, you may be, then you know one of the underlying patterns is that it continuously seems to say, there's something not right, something is missing, it is not complete, I am not complete. Something is needed here, something needs to be added to this moment, to this situation. And then it formulates further thoughts on the basis of that original erroneous assumption. Once you recognize that pattern, then it is easier not to get drawn into it, at least not for too long. So, watch your mind as it becomes active, and then you have a choice of either allowing yourself to be drawn into proliferating mind streams. You might even want to get away from here. It's quite a common phenomenon on retreats. A certain percentage of people after the second day or even the first day says, "Get me out of here." Or you start looking up the flight information on the internet. Or you call a friend. "Well, there's something not right here. I'll tell you about it." So the opportunity is here for you to allow nature to bring you into that still awareness so that you can contemplate, experience all that wonderful nature around you without undue interference, by thinking. What is there to think about when you go for a walk on the beach here? Nothing. You can only fully experience it when you become still, and then you perceive through the stillness rather than through conceptualized thought, which interprets everything you see. Oh, this is that, and that's that, and that's that. And I like, I don't like. So you use nature and come to your senses, as the expression goes. You come to your senses, but that implies that there is an awareness there that makes clear, unobstructed sensory perception possible. And then you be amazed how at the sacredness of that space through which you move here. And sacredness is not something that I could explain to you or to your mind, because the human mind says, just a second, sacredness, what does that mean? You haven't explained that term. And that would be extremely hard, impossible to explain. It's a term that is no longer much in use these days. Sacredness, that's a holiness, even is the Germanic-based word. Sacredness, the Latin-based word, is the same meaning. But you can sense it. The moment your attention rises and you go, shh, and there you see the branch of the tree moving slightly. And there you see a bird flying across, and the waves. And suddenly there's the totality of that experience. But you as that egoic entity that carries a baggage full of your past with you and your unresolved problems, in the future perhaps they'll get resolved. And of course, then others arise. You move through nature as a field of presence, not a personality or a person with. In other words, this is an opportunity for you to let go of your life situation, as I call it. You might remember reading it. What I call your life situation, which is Whatever happens is happening in your life, in your relationships, in your work situation, in your finances, in your living situation. That's your life situation, and that is what occupies almost everybody's mind continuously. Me and my life. Now, there is another dimension in you that wants to emerge that is far deeper than me and my life. You switched off your cell phones, I hear. And what about your minds? Not as easy. Because it's not just, well, it is a voice in the head, but over the years and centuries and millennia, it's more than just a voice. There's a kind of entity. It has turned into a kind of entity. And me, not ultimately real, but seemingly real enough when you confuse who you are with the talking and reacting entity in the head. Energized, amplified by emotions in a vicious circle. The emotions are created by whatever the entity is thinking, and the energy of the emotion further amplifies the entity. The ego. And the strength of that varies from person to person. In some way, we could say that the entity is an aspect of karma, what is in the East is called karma. It's patterns inside you, inherited patterns inside you, that you confuse with who you are. Consciousness identifies with the patterns. And in some humans it's a very heavy entity, extremely dramatic or angry or very heavy and sad, easily upset, always looking out for some perceived injury or slight, always ready to jump to its defense, even questioning somebody's viewpoint because you identify with the mind, which is ego. So any viewpoint is invested with a sense of self. The ego is in your viewpoint that you're expressing about this or that. So even somebody questioning your viewpoint can lead to extreme defensive measures or aggression, as you can witness everywhere, on television or in daily life. A peaceful discussion with that entity is not really possible. Because a peaceful discussion about something implies that there's some degree of disidentification from that mind-made entity. There is at least a little bit of space in you and the other person. Primarily in you. That's the main thing, is not to demand that there should be space in the other person, but to make sure that there's space in you when you're discussing something. And you can see if the other person is already getting upset. You can see why immediately. Identification with a mental position, ego. The entity feels threatened and is barking back at you. Some dogs do that also. But the same as in humans, even in vicious dogs, they are only vicious because of their past. Underneath the viciousness in every dog, there is a goodness. And underneath the madness of the egoic entity, there is also the truth of who you are or who that other human being is. So your task, as you're confronted with these entities, and you are all the time, occasionally your own still takes over, perhaps. One or two of you may still experience it occasionally. The task is to be there as the observer or witness of your mind. Then you are no longer in the grip of the egoic entity. So ego then is the unobserved mind, complete lack of awareness. In other words, there is only mind. And that's the state of, one could call it, hypnotic state or dreamlike state, in which you dream up your life. And then things happen around you. Because in every every person's life, you come into this world here, and you're surrounded by a certain situation. Things happen to you, you react. the entity reacts without any awareness. It reacts according to its aggressive, defensive conditioning. So it's completely at the mercy of what happens around it. And it perpetuates its own state. So an event that for somebody who is relatively free of the ego, at least in that particular area of their lives, the same event happening to one person is relatively unimportant. Oh, Eckhart didn't reply to my email. To one person, that is, he must be very busy, or maybe he doesn't even read it, and that's just how it is. And the other person feels deeply offended. I wrote to him 3 times, nothing. Didn't even bother to reply to me. And that's the beginning of the story. And that proliferates into how dreadful a person he is. And then you find other things that you can focus on. And that's how the entity strengthens itself. It grows, it inflates itself by this reactivity. So a relatively insignificant thing is this entity, of course, personalizes everything that happens. It's to do with me. They're trying to do something to me. He's ignoring me. How dare he? And so it grows. The next thing is the emails become angry and accusations or phone calls. I'll get you. That's how it grows. Next time you walk out of your house, I'll be behind you. That's how it can grow. These are more extreme forms, but not uncommon. So it doesn't matter to what extent it grows, but you can see the simple fact of somebody not replying becomes something dreadful that's happening to me and proliferates into a story. It can occupy a large section of your life. And another person said, well, that's how it is. When the Power of Now first came out, some people suggested to me it would be a good idea to send a copy to Deepak Chopra, and I did, because that maybe he'll read it, and it was published in 3,000 copies, the first edition, which had to be taken. I carried to bookstores in a plastic bag. And so I signed it to him, and nothing. As if it had disappeared into a hole. And now this is what happens when people send books to me, but now I know why. Because you can't even read them all. You can't possibly read them all, the manuscripts and the books. But luckily, that entity was no longer operating inside me, so there was no complaining that Deepak had not, there was no reply. Well, that's just how it is. He must be busy. Maybe he read it and didn't like it. Maybe he didn't read it. Who knows? The moment I interpret something, I'm projecting. So it's futile to interpret something. You have no clue why. It's just, that's how it is. It's the simple isness of fact. And of course the truth is, I'm sure he never even saw it, because he gets too many books. It's impossible. By the way, later, when Power of Now was already doing very well, he did write an endorsement when it wasn't needed anymore, but it was... that was very nice. But if I had sent him angry emails, I still have not heard from you. After 3 months of sending 10 emails, you still neglected to inform me whether, etc., etc., then I don't think he would have written an endorsement. So your reaction determines also what happens next. So if your reaction is an egoic one, it's not simply the reaction to something that has happened in the present moment, it also determines how the events unfold from now on. So if the egoic reaction is aggressive, negative, demanding, complaining, whatever the ego does to strengthen itself, to feel stronger, then that creates an echo in the external world. It's like you're shouting a particular sound, you're shouting it out into the world, and then it echoes back. So what you're putting out then, as in your reaction, which comes through words and actions, then comes back at you. People react to your reaction because they are not perhaps totally enlightened, in which case they wouldn't react to your reactions. But they are also, they have their egos, so they react to your reaction, and you create a whole train of reactivity, and this is how the drama develops and grows. And it's all taken for absolutely real, and that's how it is. You don't realize, the entity doesn't realize it's creating the whole story. And all it hears back is the echo of its own conditioning, coming back to you from the external, the outside world. And so, and of course that then serves as a very powerful confirmation that your initial interpretation of events was absolutely correct. So, because he says, you see, his original intention was to deceive me, to whatever, and then when I confronted him, he got angry because I was right, and so on, and so And if you've ever tried to argue with the egoic entity, with someone, you can see the futility of it. It is impossible. You cannot convince this egoic entity of its own illusory nature. You can't. You only strengthen it. Arguing with the ego is quite funny ultimately, but it's an absurd enterprise. On its own level, it will always win. And it will draw you. Well, the moment you start arguing with the ego, you're already trapped in your own mind patterns. So the karma then, this being an aspect of karma, karma is what happens. Usually people say karma is what happens to you, but more importantly, karma is how you react to what happens, because that is what perpetuates the conditioning. And that creates what you experience as your life, and it creates how other people react to you. So how you experience interactions. amazing. So often I observe the futility of egoic reaction to nothing, to reacting to nothingness and blowing it up like a huge soap bubble, talking about it for days on end, until finally reality confirms you were right all along. It's quite a trap. So you need to the heavier the egoic entity in you is, the more dense it is, because the density, we could call it that, I'm talking about ego. The emotional aspect of ego is a large part of the emotional aspect of ego is the pain bodies. The pain body really is the emotional aspect of the egoic entity. And the density of the ego in you varies from person to person. There is probably nobody listening to this here or there. This is the wormhole of the camera through which the words are reaching out, and there's somebody the other end. Hi. Not just somebody, far more people than sitting here. There are thousands of people at the through some. But there's nobody, people sitting here or at the other end of the wormhole, whose ego is extraordinarily dense, or if they are, they won't stay here for very long. Or they will switch off this screen saying, this is awful. There's nothing that the ego likes less than to hear about itself. So it is then not so likely that in you there is this great density of the ego and pain body, but you still encounter in your daily life, you will still encounter many humans who manifest extreme density of ego and pain body. And of course, those people create suffering for themselves and others. That's their purpose in life. That's where they are at in their evolutionary journey. They are here as spiritual teachers. They are creating suffering, which eventually will awaken them when they realize that the suffering they experience is self-created. But that could take a while before they realize that. In the meantime, they might attempt to create suffering for you at the same, it's because they go together. And so they become your teachers because they force you into more intense presence, or they draw you into the egoic unconsciousness. So when you are confronted with dense egos, as one spiritual teacher in India called them ego-Gs, G being a term of respect, so the ego-Gs, there are still many around, and they're here to teach you more presence. Of course, they don't know that that's what they're doing, but within the totality, that's ultimately what their function is in the evolutionary journey of humanity. something you can practice here and for the rest of your life is to perceive things, look and listen, sometimes even smell or touch or taste, without any mental label. This is an ideal environment to do it in nature, but you can do it anywhere, and it's not even a doing, we call it doing. Just you look at something, or even not just looking around. So either a specific thing, or you take in the totality of what's there, either in the room or out in nature, the sky, the trees, or you look at one thing and you're still while you look. And that's very important practice. And then you listen. Various sounds arise most of the time, and then always two things are there. There's that which arises in your sense perception, listening, seeing. And there is the space of consciousness in which it arises. You can also call it the light of consciousness in which it is perceived, without which there would be no perception. And whenever you do that, you are not a person in that moment. You are not a person. You are what comes to the forefront is the transcendent dimension to who you are, the consciousness. And so you can sense yourself as the consciousness, which is the space for whatever is being perceived. And there's one can almost a kind of joy in that, an aliveness, a beingness. You can sense your own identity beyond who you are, beyond the person, by just perceiving something and then at the same time sensing your own presence, which isn't your own, but which call it your own, the presence. And that is a passive thing, it seems, seemingly. It's a taking in what's there. The next step is to practice being in that transcendent state of consciousness while things are going on around you. More challenging, being in that state while you're engaged in some activity. Start with simple activities. And again, the background is the presence. And you're doing whatever it is you need to do. For certain activities, of course, you need to think. And the thinker will start up. That's fine. When you speak, there's thinking. But you can, while you speak, you can still be connected to the transcendent. Then you don't speak from the level of the personality, then you speak from the more intelligent level of consciousness, the unconditioned consciousness. Very different kind of speaking. When you speak from the personality, whatever you say is colored and determined by the conditioning of your mind as the person. There's another way of speaking, even if it's a simple conversation. You're speaking from a truer, deeper level of who you are. And those words have a certain quality. You might not be saying necessarily anything significant, but those words have a certain aliveness and quality that is different from what comes from the personality level. So at any given time, there's the two dimensions to who you are, one could say. For the time being, let's put it like that. There's the personal level, and there's the transcendent you. And usually the transcendent in your normal daily life will be in the background. If you can sense that in the background, then you can deal with the stuff you need to deal with in the foreground of your life. To this and this and this. Even thinking is in the foreground of your life. I have to think about this. And yet, at the same time, you sense yourself as the presence. So that's the depth within you. There's a stillness, there can be a stillness even while you're speaking. There's a stillness in the background, and when you've come to the end of a sentence, you might notice, there's a gap, and you're not thinking between the end of one sentence and the beginning of a new sentence. And so more and more, the transcendent self emerges more into your life, comes in more. And the conditioned self does not disappear completely, but the conditioned self becomes less dense. The density of the personality, that many people are in the grip of that. There's a heaviness to it. I can sometimes see how people carry this burden of a personality without not the slightest glimpse of anything beyond, and it's a terrible burden to carry. The only sense of self they have is that conditioned sense of self, and there's a heaviness to it and a density. And as the transcendent emerges more, the personality level becomes more lighter and more, one could say, transparent almost. So the light shines through more. The analogy you could use is a lampshade. When there's only the personality, the lampshade is so heavy, there's only a little bit of light shining through, but the layers of the lampshade are so thick that only very little comes through, and whatever comes through is totally formed by the lampshade. And then the shade gets a bit more transparent, and there's more light coming through. The same person is still there, the same lampshade, but there's a transparency to something deeper. And that's the only way you become more authentic, you become more truly yourself, the deeper, unconditioned self, which the Buddha calls the no-self. And if in spiritual terminology you could call Buddha nature is arising, Christ consciousness is arising, whatever you want to call it. So you cannot love your neighbor as yourself, as somebody once said. He said, love your neighbor as yourself, But he didn't give that as a commandment because he would have known that that's impossible for the personality. They missed a little bit when they wrote down what he was saying. He said, but the kingdom of heaven bit goes together with the loving your neighbor as yourself. So when you find that dimension within yourself, that is the kingdom of heaven, which in modern terms I would translate as the dimension of kingdom is dimension. Heaven is, in many languages, it's the same word as sky. In French, in Spanish, in German. Heaven and sky are the same word. So Jesus uses this thing, the sky, the vast expanse of the sky, as the closest word he can get to describing the inner space, the inner spaciousness. Sky has no form. Sky, we have a word for sky, but sky doesn't actually exist. There is no sky. There just seems to be a sky, because what you're seeing as the blue, if it's blue, is just the light against the background of space. The darkness of space behind it creates that illusion that there is something there. But if you travel upwards, you will never reach the sky. You may reach the clouds, and then you go to the clouds, and then there's more sky, and finally it's gone. Where was the sky? There is no sky. So it has no form, so he used the best word he could find was heaven or sky, the kingdom of heaven, the dimension of formlessness, which is within you, he said. And that's the most important thing you in your life, to find that. That's priority number one. And then, as you find that, then you love your neighbor as yourself, because you recognize the same formless essence in you is the same formless essence in the so-called other, and then you love your neighbor as yourself. But no matter how hard you try, you can't real empathy, real loving kindness, real benevolence, real goodwill towards another. It's not really, you cannot sustain for very long if there's only the personality level. You have a resemblance of that, but it's usually the ego playing a particular role. So, being the light, what does that mean? There's a very important statement that Jesus made that kind of inspired me to use this perhaps seemingly strange expression. In one of the Gospels in the New Testament, Jesus said, addressing his disciples or whoever was listening to him, basically addressing each one of us, he said, "You are the light of the world." That's a very profound statement, not perhaps necessarily understood in the churches. There's another statement that he made in the Gospel of John, where he said, with reference to himself, "I am the light of the world." So we have two statements very of profound significance. On the one hand, he said, "You are the light of the world." And then elsewhere, we find him saying, "I am the light of the world." So what does that mean? He's talking to, when he says, "You are the light of the world," he was talking to His followers, simple people, not people who are important in the eyes of the world. They were simple people. So he was not telling them that they are very special. He was pointing to a deeper reality, a deeper, I would say, a deeper identity within them, deeper than their superficial social identity, their form identity in this world. Uh, he was pointing to an essence within every human being. Now, you may find that probably nowhere in the Bible is the word consciousness used. Jesus never used the word consciousness. It would have been meaningless, and probably in his native language, which was Aramaic, the word consciousness probably didn't even exist. There's even a dispute whether the word consciousness existed in ancient Greek, which of course is the language in which the New Testament was written. There probably is, but that we don't need to go into that. So if there had been the word consciousness, it would still have been meaningless to his listeners who were simple people. And somehow humanity was not ready to hear this. It would have been meaningless to most people alive on the planet to say, the essence of who you are is you are conscious. The light stands for, obviously, consciousness. It could not stand for anything else. And the light in which the world appears is the consciousness. Without consciousness, there's no world. The greatest mystery about the universe, there are many mysteries in the universe. I love mysteries. There are superficial mysteries. I love the mysteries of UFOs, and I love the mysteries of crop circles, things like that. We, and then, of course, there are the deep mysteries of the vastness of space, outer space, the mystery of the infinite, almost infinite number of galaxies. Every galaxy is an entire world system. Incomprehensible, inconceivable, unbelievable mystery. And we've only scratched the surface of that. We've only scratched the surface of what this universe is. Then we have the mystery, the outer mystery. Then we have the mystery of the atomic realm and the subatomic realm, which also is inconceivable, incomprehensible. We cannot fully understand it. It's just an amazing mystery. So we have the macrocosmic mystery, and then we have the microcosmic mystery of the world. And in between, we have our everyday world, which we move in. And yet underlying all that, underlying both the macrocosmic and the microcosmic and our everyday world, is the deepest mystery of all. And that is the mystery of consciousness. The most incredible thing is that there is not only a universe, but the most mysterious thing about the universe is that the universe is conscious. And we don't know what consciousness is. We cannot know what consciousness is in the same way in which we can know something that we look at and examine, that a scientist can examine, the macrocosm, the galaxies, the microcosm, the atomic and subatomic realm. Scientists rarely talk about consciousness because they don't know what to say about it. How does it originate? What is it? Where does it come from? And yet it's so beyond any doubt. One could almost say the one thing that you cannot doubt is that you are conscious right now about yourself. You can doubt everything about yourself, but what you cannot doubt is that you are conscious. Even if the entire world that what you experience as the world could all be a dream. It could be, maybe it's even the Matrix. I don't think it is, but Matrix is just a modern form of saying it's a dreamlike thing. What this very moment could be your dream, that you are dreaming that we are listening to somebody talking about the fact that you might be dreaming. And that you might be dreaming that you're seeing this image on the screen and this person is talking. But of course, where's this person talking? This person is talking. Where does this talk take place? In your consciousness. I am in your consciousness. Obviously, that's where the whole thing is created. Now, when we say your consciousness, whether that is correct, I would say probably not, although I use that term, the way I see it, there's only one consciousness. You are a manifestation of that one consciousness. So I am speaking in this one consciousness. And who am I? I am the light of the world, the one consciousness. As are you. You are that consciousness. And that is the one thing that you cannot doubt. You are the light of the world. And this is an experiential realization. It is not something abstract. It is not something to believe in. And I believe that I am the light of the world. There's nothing to believe in. But to realize firsthand, to realize this in your immediate experience, the very fact that the one thing that you cannot doubt about yourself, your whole identity may be just a mental construct. And it is, by the way. Your whole identity, that's just maybe so that you don't stop listening to me. Your whole identity may be just a temporary mental construct that can be doubted perhaps a bit like a dream. And your whole life could be, it is a kind of dream. It's a question of perspective, where you say it's real or it's a dream. A dream evaporates very quickly, it dissipates, it disappears. But every experience that you have disappears very quickly. Even the dinner you had last night, was that a dream? Your last vacation, was that a dream or did it happen? And then you remember a dream you had last night. Okay, that was a dream, but the vacation was real, but it's gone now. So you can doubt many things. You can doubt the absolute reality of this world and your experience. That may be, but there was a famous, as you know, probably French philosopher, Descartes, who came to this point. He wanted to, and he came at the end of the Middle Ages, which had all kinds of weird beliefs and superstitions. And so he wanted to know, is there anything that is beyond doubt? Everything can be doubted. And he went inside, and then he realized that he was still thinking all the time. And so he said, I think, therefore I am. That's beyond doubt. But he hadn't gone quite deep enough. He was on his way towards the true realization, but he stopped before he reached the point where you transcend thinking but are still conscious and aware. If he had waited a little and if he had stopped thinking for a moment and realized that beyond thought there is a consciousness, there's a vast realm of consciousness. Beyond thought there is an awareness, there is the light of consciousness before it becomes a thing. That the light shines through every thought form. The light is not separate from, the thoughts are not separate from the totality of consciousness. They are like a form that consciousness takes. So the realization, I am the light of the world, is extremely important. And that's the realization of the one thing within you that is beyond doubt, that you are conscious. And even if it's all a dream, for the dream to be perceived, to be experienced, for the dream to happen, there needs to be a light in which it happens, in which it is perceived and known. And that is the light of consciousness. And the entire world, to appear, it needs to become a world, it needs the light of consciousness. And so this consciousness, which is the light of the world, which is the essence of who you are, you cannot, scientists have such a problem with it because that's the one thing, not a thing, I just call it a thing, it's the one thing that cannot be an object of knowledge. Everything else, you are the subject that knows the object. You look at something, you're the subject. I look at my hand, here's my hand, I look my hand. Anything that the scientist does, the scientist is the observer, and what he or she examines is the observed. Now that works with everything, except with one thing. You cannot be the observer of consciousness. In other words, consciousness cannot become the observed because consciousness is the eternal subject, the eternal observer. So if let's say the scientist is looking for consciousness, and the power that is looking for consciousness is the light of consciousness. So whatever the scientist looks at to solve the mystery of consciousness is the consciousness looking for itself. And so he could never find that consciousness as say, oh, there it is. You can never say, I have it. You cannot even say, I understand it. It's the eternal mystery. But that is the eternal mystery of who you are. So you cannot, essentially, you cannot make yourself into an object of knowledge. That would be the egoic self. You can know yourself as an ego and say, that's me. You can talk about yourself or your conditioned entity, the person, the personality, the historical person, the mental construct that is who you are. That can be an object of knowledge. But the essence of who you are can never be an object of knowledge because it is the eternal subject. So you cannot, and it is inseparable from the transcendent, which is really God. So in essence, you are God, or perhaps say more acceptable and perhaps more accurate to say, perhaps I wouldn't go so far as to say that you are God, but I would say that you are an emanation of God, in the same way that a ray of sunlight is an emanation of the sun and is connected to the sun, but is not the sun. In the same way, you are an emanation of Source, the One, but God, you are now, if you look for God, the same applies, because really that is consciousness is the emanation. The same applies, you cannot find God as an object, and there it is. Jesus said that literally, but people just don't seem to get it. Because people asked him, he used this expression, kingdom of heaven, which in my translation is kingdom is dimension, and heaven is spaciousness. It's the dimension of of pure consciousness, spaciousness. The dimension of spaciousness is and it's a kingdom of heaven. Heaven is not an external thing. It's an inner dimension of consciousness. So find the kingdom of heaven that is within you. Okay, he said, and then his disciples said, when does the kingdom of heaven come? Because they had completely misunderstood what he was talking about. When does the kingdom of heaven come? And he said, no, he's talking, this kingdom of heaven is the consciousness. And he said, the kingdom of heaven does not come with signs to be perceived. You cannot say, look, it's over here, or look, it's over there. Because truly, I tell you, it is within you. He said it all. What does it mean? He says, the kingdom of heaven does not come as with signs that you can perceive. You cannot perceive it in the way in which you perceive external things, because it is the eternal subject. You cannot make God or consciousness, which is the emanation of God, into an object of perception or an object of knowledge. And that's why the only way a scientist can understand consciousness, if the scientist directs the attention that goes outward back into itself. And the scientist, or anybody, you, becomes aware that what he, she has been looking for is already the answer. It's in the answer is what you are what you're looking for. The conditions in your life, they can fulfill you for a while, and then it's no longer fulfilling. This happens to relationships, it happens to jobs that you find, activities. Unless you go deeper, nothing is fulfilling for very long. You are not a set of problems that you need to resolve. So let's go back to that beautiful, very simple realization that you don't need to remember anything about what your mind tells you who you are. It doesn't mean that you now have lost all your memories. No, they are still there if you need them. They come back. Whatever analogy you want to use, I used to say the filing system, when you need it, you can pull it out, but they don't use it anymore. So it's a computer analogy you use now. It's there somewhere in your computer. It's all still there. When you need it, of course, it's still there. But does it have to be there always when you don't need it? That continuous, the problematic self-talk, do you need to be burdened and walk around every day of your life burdened by the problem making? Well, it's pretending to be problem solving, but it's really problem making of your mind, and to carry around with you the heavy entity, the me, which goes, and you're trying to get to a point, at some future point you think, I'm going to be liberated and free of all that, and then I will start living. And many people, even if they don't verbalize it as I do right now, The underlying mindset is, when I can free myself from all these problems, then I can start living. And that, of course, when you are 25, you can still believe that. When you're 35, you say, yeah, it can still happen. And when you become 45 and 50, okay, maybe I'll really start living when I retire. And then you begin to live for the retirement. Okay, only another 3 years now. And finally, the day comes, and then on the first day of your retirement, you sit at home and say, what now? Who am I without my function, my social function? But nobody's telling me who I am anymore. What am I going to do now? And then you try golf. And you drive around in the golf buggies. And for a few weeks it feels good and you can drink and so. And then that dissatisfaction returns. The same mindset is still there despite your retirement. In fact, you become more aware of the dissatisfied mind now that you don't have to have that many external problems anymore, and yet there's still the heaviness of the mind and the discontent. So that's not the way to go. So the wonderful news is there is a dimension in you that we could call the dimension of depth, or the transcendent dimension, where you as the person become something else, where the person can only really often compare the person that you are to the ripple on the surface of the ocean. That's the person. But the ripple is one with the totality of the ocean. If the ripple doesn't know that, its existence is problematic, fearful. You fear every other ripple, or you want them to incorporate them into your life. Maybe if we come with me, together we'll be a bigger ripple. Marry me. And you will make me happy, and I will make you happy. It has been tried many times. So to lead a satisfying existence as a ripple that only knows itself as the ripple and not as the ocean is very frustrating. You can't. It doesn't work. So the ripple needs to realize that it is much deeper than just the ripple. There's a depth to the ripple where it's no longer a ripple, where it's connected with everything and with every other ripple, where it's connected with the heart of the universe, not just on a human level. And that is true awakening. And after that, and when that is realized, and the ripple can sense that, it's a stillness in you, a presence that has no particular content, then the ripple becomes relatively happy. It doesn't mean in the world, on the surface of ripples, things still can go wrong, still things can disappear and break down, and ripples never last for very long. That continues, and yet you feel you can actually enjoy your ripple identity and enjoy the surface of life also. It's actually quite nice. Here, look at all those little ripples. And ripple means whatever you perceive in this analogy. Ripple means whatever life form is there in your perception, including yourself, and whether it's humans or whatever you perceive in this existence, it is the manifestation of life. of the one life that has manifested as a multiplicity of life forms. And each life form is inhabited by the one life, a manifestation of the one life or the one consciousness. So when you realize that, and that's the beginning of that realization is to sense the I that has nothing to do with your past or your future or your name or anything your mind is saying. Your simple presence. That means the ripple is becoming aware of something much bigger. And suddenly we have a relatively happy ripple. And can enjoy every moment of its ripple existence in a sense of wonder, because it's no longer demanding that things that are not permanent should be permanent. And it's not demanding anymore that the surface existence of things should satisfy me. You're here to satisfy me. You're here to make me happy. You're here to fulfill me. The surface of the ripple can't do that. The conditions in your life, they can fulfill you for a while, and then it's no longer fulfilling. This happens to relationships, it happens to jobs that you find, activities. Unless you go deeper, nothing is fulfilling for very long. And so, this is why we are here, and this is the meaning of retreat. It's a retreat from yourself in order to find what the Buddhists would call the no-self, or what other teachings would call the deeper self, or the Atman, or your Buddha nature, or the Christ within, whatever term you want to use to point to it. And that's why we're here. So all the external things here are helpful. It's easier here to connect with the depths of who you are and realize the depths of who you are. Of course, when you leave here, then you get challenged again. It's not that you don't get challenged here too, and especially if you're still very much identified with the mind, you find many challenges wherever you go. This isn't right. Don't like that. He doesn't look very spiritual to me. Or the opposite, all these people are so much more spiritual than me. Do they know that I'm not spiritual? So the practice is to voluntarily, as much as possible, relinquish identification with the thinking mind and your usual self. And what very much helps with that is just as much as you can. Don't walk around as a heavy personality and person. No, walk around as a light, as a field of conscious perception, and like a little child that goes and look at everything. In other words, presence practice. Here, it's more easier than in your usual surroundings. Presence practice, present moment practice,